ancestors, dear beloved Thai, dear beloved community. The monastic brothers and sisters are going to evoke the Bodhisattva Avalokiteshvara. The literal translation of her name is one who listens and looks deeply into the cries of the world. In each one of us, there's this great being. We have the capacity to listen deeply and to look deeply into our own pain and suffering. Collectively, through this chant, we will channel this energy to look inward, to recognize, be present, and embrace that suffering deep within. And as we feel our hearts soften and open up, we can also direct that loving, powerful energy to acknowledge and embrace the suffering in the friends, brothers, and sisters all around us. We may look different from each other, and yet deep inside, our experiences are not different and are not separate, because we are interconnected, we inter-are. And then together, we will send this compassionate energy even further to all those in this country, all over the world. Those we know, those we don't even know their names or their faces, and yet they are also suffering so. So, dear family, let us sit up beautifully with our stable posture. Come back to our breathing so that our hearts may be open to embrace, to accept, and also to help release. During the chant, tears may stream down. Let those teardrops soothe us and cleanse us. You may want to join your palms, or you may just sit stably and beautifully. Dear beloved community, I'm very happy to introduce to you two other Sangha OGs. Sister of Peace, also known as Sister Angim, and Brother Brett Cook. So Sister Peace and Brother Brett attended the first People of Color retreat right here 20 years ago. And then Sister Peace went on to ordain in the Plum Village tradition in 2008. And she has been instrumental in bringing the Dharma to people of color. And we are very grateful that she continues to stay very engaged and supportive of the monastic community as well as the lay community. And Brother Brett Cook came with his wife Maria. Are you here, Maria? And they were pregnant at the time with the first son, and he's named Sunyata, which means emptiness. And the practice of the community of the family have been the practice, the center of the practice for Brother Brett. So focused that I remember when Sunyata was only not even 2 years old. And that day I was standing at the stairway, at the bottom of the stairway, talking to Brother Brett, and the bell was invited. And this little 2-year-old boy, when everybody felt silent, he said, "Bell, breathe." That's what he did. He couldn't come today because now he's in college. He's in college. But his brother, the younger one, Bumi, is here. Bumi, are you here, Kang? Raise your hand. Oh! Bumi means the land, the Bodhisattva land. Yeah. Isn't that wonderful? So, dear Sangha, with the small sound of the bell, let us rise and greet our two beloved members, Brother Brett Cook and Sister Peace.
Wow. Dear, beautiful, beloved, brown, brilliant, rainbow community. What an honor it is for us to sit here before you today, celebrating 20 years of the vision of progenitors who saw and met a need. And just before I invite our wonderful brother to speak, I want to offer to you a teeny practice that really helps me a lot when I'm sitting where I'm sitting. And I call it the practice of eye hugging. And I look in your eye and I smile, and you smile, and you look in the eye of maybe someone next to you, and you smile, and you embrace. And this is a beautiful practice for me personally, and I share it with you, and I hope it would be a worthy practice for you too. It's something we can do at any time, and people don't even have to know it. Right? It's, hey, I see you. And I feel comfortable, and I'm grateful to be here with you. Has a wonderful effect of also calming. And so without further ado, there really isn't much introduction. On the other hand, there's a lot that I could say about Brett Cook, who is an artist, a teacher, a practitioner in this tradition who has been around for 20 plus years. And I feel very gifted and honored to just be sitting next to him, to be able to share with him, and to hear what he has to share with us today.
Dear Tai, dear Sister Chang Kang, dear beloved community, dear family, so wonderful to be here. It's incredible. In West Africa, they have a tradition of a griot. And a griot is a person that is a storyteller. And the storyteller, they tell history or kind of generational memories across time so that people can remember. So part of my personhood here is going to evoke that sensibility, not to give you FOMO, which is fear of missing out if you don't speak acronym. It's really just an effort to continue this practice and kind of give you some context for both your practice and how this has happened. So 20 years ago, I was living in New York, and I had a very rigorous life. I was a teacher, as she said. I was an engaged person in the world, working for social change, really aspiring to how do I change culture and media and policy? Like, these things need to be changed. Something needs to be done. And so coming back here was actually to my motherland. I was born in San Diego. And so part of that coming home was nice on its own, but I had never been here before. I had a rigorous yoga practice. I was an Ashtangi for a number of years. I was sitting. I was vegan. So in a lot of ways, I had kind of contemplative strategies to look at like my true nature. But many of those I was using almost as a hack, like as a DIY to like keep me going so that I could stay out at the club and still get up and teach in the morning. And so one of my first memories I can remember being here at the first meal and being struck by the silence. And there was a sister, not a brown robe sister, just a regular brown sister. And she was sitting at her meal, and there were bees flying around her food. And she wasn't moving. She wasn't disturbed at all. And I said, oh, they're teaching sorcery up at this place. But more than that, it was really just an exemplification of her commitment and the awareness of the container at that time. Because at that time, this meditation hall was new. And outside of it, it was really different. There was grass all around, like green sod. Like they hadn't got to the environmental consciousness level of the practice yet. That was still emergent. And the center worked in a way, too, that, you know, it was still a time when as much as this was a spiritual center, this was a cultural center. That for the migrant population of the Vietnamese in this region, this was a place they came to support their culture. So the grandmas were still cooking the meals. And because it was one of the earliest kind of retreats, you know, all of these bigwigs from the BIPOC kind of like legacy came from all over the country to be a part of this. And so here I am a part of this with them. And we haven't done this yet in this retreat, but starting the meal, they start with the contemplations. And one of the things in the contemplations, the first contemplation is, this food is a gift of the whole universe. The earth, the sky, numerous living beings, and much hard work. And so it's more than just like what I had known about saying grace before you eat. Like it really was this teaching that's in the lived experience that is so resonant about this place. Like here's this teaching of interconnectedness, that we are part of the cosmos. All of this is part of the cosmos. And you're gonna do this when you eat. And so then in the morning at meditation, a similar thing happened. That I had come here, okay, I'm gonna come and learn some new things so I can continue to try to change the world, make a difference, keep going. And so the meditation was a way of stopping that. Just like the contemplation stopped. Because usually when I ate food, I didn't stop before I ate, I just started eating. And so just that same rush that I brought to the meal was the same rush I kind of brought to sitting. And samadhi is nice, but much more of my practice sitting is trying to stop all of those things that are going through my mind and recognizing that they're there and letting them go. And walking meditation similarly was a similar kind of experience. That I'm from New York, man. Nobody walks slow in New York. So my habit energy was keep it moving. I'm from money-making Manhattan, like, you know, you got to keep it moving. And then here's this practice. We're going to slow down and be mindful of your steps. And then in the spirit of this kind of recollection, I pulled out my old sketchbook and I remembered Thai's Dharma talks. And, you know, jazz is the true American art form. And in a lot of ways, Thai was a jazz musician. Because in the sense, like, jazz musicians have scales. So, like, he has the Dharma, and you practice that, and you can improvise, so he could improvise, but then he had standards. Like he would have stories that over years I found out, like, oh, this is one of his standards. Like he's gonna pull out the flower story. And just like a standard, it'll change, like you'll hear it, but if you listen closely, like it's different every time. So I can remember, and this was in my sketchbook, the story where it's a story that I've subsequently used in teachings and projects now for decades, for 2 decades. That if you look deep enough into a flower, you can see it's made out of the sun because the flower needed the sun to grow. And if you look deeper into the flower, you can see that it's made out of dirt because the flower needed dirt to grow. And if I look deeper into the flower, I see it's actually made of the farmer because the farmer is the one that took care of the flower. And if I look even deeper into the flower, I see it's made out of bread because the farmer had to eat so he could take care of the flower. So pretty soon, it becomes evident that the flower is not made of flour. It's made of non-flour elements. All these things not flour. And this notion that somehow we are separate from all the things around us is really what makes us suffer. And so just like that first mindful contemplation for eating, he was teaching about interconnectedness. And so he said after that story, people in the United States, they're spending all this time building walls and trying to get people to speak the same language. And they're not even from the United States. And like the whole meditation all started rolling, laughing. And my social justice personhood was like so excited. Like, oh, he gets it. Like, this is my dude. I really felt like here's this person that has this kind of understanding about non-discrimination. That once I realize I'm connected to all things, that for me to discriminate against those other things is to discriminate against myself. That's me, whatever superiority I have or sense of inferiority I have or even sense of equality, trying to compare to these other things, is all part of what's making me suffer. And so this became a whole kind of practice of stopping. And I'll share this story before I give it back to Sister, that this became a kind of a new way of being in the world. And I went back to New York. And at the time, I was this aspiring, emergent, almost famous artist. I had a studio a little bigger than this meditation hall. So I had assistants, I had a gallery, I was showing things all over the country, the world, and I could not pay my rent on time. Because you know what they say about New York? The 2 hardest things about New York are finding a place to live and finding a way to pay for it. And so within the mythology that we might have about a famous musician, artist, drummer, painter, dancer, like I was grinding. Back then we used to call it grinding. And not grinding to a stop in mindfulness. Okay? This is grinding like in spite of all odds. You got to keep going. You got to keep persevering through the suffering, even if your own delusion is causing that suffering. And so my landlord's like, look, Brett, I love the things you make, all the stuff you do in the country, but you haven't turned your rent in on time for 8 years, man. We're about to kick you out. And at the same time, I got an invitation from Coca-Cola to do a commercial. So I had kind of heard that the largest international tribunal against Coke at that time in Bolivia was happening. And this is when Coca-Cola was privatizing water in India for Daisani. And so there was a part of me like, I don't know if I can do this. Like I know I need this income, and I know this is a huge opportunity, but because of the practice and because I'm starting to experience these other values, this is kind of opposite to who I want to be, what I want to be in the world. And so one day the gallery writes me and they're like, and so to give you some more context, my studio was, I had a friend from Berkeley. I went to Berkeley and he was an architect, and I spent everything I had to build it. We put plants in it and had these wonderful rooms in it, had great parties, had a disco ball in it. And so it was this wonderful third floor space filled with light. And so my gallery contacts me and sends me this fax. And so I'm still trying to decide, do I want to do this? Do I want to do this commercial? And they send me this fax. And so the fax is the storyboard for the commercial. Like, they just assume he's going to do this. And so the first storyboard is like inner city sounds, sirens, people yelling on the street. So that's not my studio. Next shot, hooded figure painting out in the street. Third image, takes the hood off, takes a drink of the Coca-Cola. And then the next image is Macy Gray, D'Angelo, and Common, because I paint portraits. And then it fades to black, and it says family portrait, real, Coca-Cola. So I had a friend who was an educator who's like, Brett, you know why you can do these projects all over the world, man? You're clean. You haven't ever done anything like this before. And part of what I opened my talk with just now was like, my aspiration was to change the world. I wanted to change culture. There had been so many times my heart had been broken because people had done things that so apparently it didn't align their actions with their intentions. And so I started thinking to myself, would Arundhati Roy do this commercial? Would Cesar Chavez do this commercial? Would Edward Said do this commercial? Would Thich Nhat Hanh do this commercial? Thich Nhat Hanh's not doing this commercial. So I didn't do the commercial. And it was such a revolutionary shift in the trajectory of my career, my personhood, everything. Just a complete different direction that indirectly was about stopping. That I actually was stopping what I had aspired to do, that I thought I needed to do to change the world, to change culture, to change media. By choosing not to do it, I was changing it. And really that came out of this practice. Sound of the bell, please.
Dear Thai, dear Sister Chan Kong, I want to start just by paying homage to our beloved teachers and the life that they have dedicated so that we could be here today. Sister Chan Kong and Tai enter R. There's Tai because of Sister Chan Kong, and there's Sister Chan Kong because of Tai. Just like with us. What is the word from Africa? Ubuntu. Because you are. We are. Last night during the orientation, there was a beautiful photo from Magnolia Grove Monastery that showed our teacher and Dr. King holding a scroll. This says something about building a beloved community is the most noble task. And during the time I was fortunate enough to be there, I would often walk over to the beloved community garden. And not to be disrespectful, but I would say, I'm going to go see the boys today. Because I need something. And I would walk, I'd do my walking meditation over there. And I would walk the circle around. And I would pause and I would look up like I'm looking at this beautiful stained glass. And I say, how did y'all do it? Their lives were so large. Surely the challenges were larger than we could ever know. And whatever might have been bothering me would suddenly have perspective. It wasn't to lessen it, but it was to understand if they could do it, surely I could do. And they both walked. One foot was walking for civil rights, another for human rights, and two more were walking for peace. It was because I knew of the relationship between Tai and Dr. King that I was interested in this particular tradition. And those two walked, didn't they? They walked and they stopped and they took care. And when they spoke after their stillness, those words dropped into our hearts and our feet started walking. And I'm so grateful to them for the tradition that continues on. And so grateful that I've had the chance, if you haven't, come on down to Memphis to the National Civil Rights Museum, where you can do some very powerful walking meditation, right where Dr. King was assassinated. You can walk the trajectory of the bullet and where it came from. And you can walk around the history. I also want to pay a little homage to Larry Ward and Kyra Jewell. Just a snippet. How lucky could someone be? In my case, I often refer to myself as an LLG. I'm a lucky little girl. He's a lucky little boy. There's lucky little we, lucky little them, lucky little everybody. Because here we are. And a month after I got the lamp to teach, so grateful, I ended up in South Africa with Larry and Peggy. You all must know Peggy too, his beautiful wife and lifelong mate. And I was able to give my first Dharma talk in Africa. And words fail to describe what that was like, and to do it in the presence of progenitors, OGs, in our tradition. It was a beautiful, beautiful moment. And my beloved sister, Kyra Jewell, was there when I needed a lot of support. But one particular, it has to do with the ancestors. I was inspired to write a story for the Mindfulness Bell. And I was all ready. I had my idea what I wanted to say, I was going to write, and I sat down with pen and paper, and nothing happened. I was like, what's wrong? And I sat still. I was still new to the monastic tradition, but I stopped and said, what's going on? And my ancestors spoke to me, and they said, girl, now you know, our storytelling is an oral tradition. Now first you got to tell that story. You can't just hop from the head to the pen. You've got to tell the story. And then it will flow through you, through your heart, down your arm, and into words. And that was one of many, many deep insights that I have had in this tradition. Many. Stop, listen. If I'm smart, I'll listen. If I'm brave, I'll act. Like the 2, the 3, the 4, the 5 I've just mentioned. And I was able to do that article, and it was published in the Mindfulness Bell 150 years ago. And I've been able to contribute bits and pieces to various publications with insights. But what's also, I think, important for me to share is my brother mentioned the stopping, the walking, the sitting, whatever the practice is. And I want to suggest that stopping is not only becoming still inside, and it's not necessarily becoming still outside, but whether we can hold that stillness in movement. And I've been blessed to have many opportunities to explore that. A few that are really profound in terms of their effect on me and hopefully the effect on others. Some of you may have heard me talk that I've had the blessing to go into jail. In Memphis, they call it the Juvenile Detention Center, but it's a jail for kids 12 to 17. And to be able to share with them, well, you know, when we go places, as the Dharma evolves, it changes name. So decided to call it slow walking, because the space they had to share in was 8 by 10 maybe, to walk in. And being able to embrace those children, even though there are those who were fearful for me. And I said, why? Well, you going to jail? I said, they're my children. They're my children. How can I be afraid to go see my children? I was always elated to go and to share with them and to share so many other practices, like Ty's teaching of standing like a tree in a storm. Because you can imagine the anger, the stuffed emotions that were pent up there. But I'll also share this with you. When we were done in 3 months, the violence went down 54%. Simple stopping, walking, sitting slowly. There was also a beautiful artistic component where they had an opportunity to create ways to get in touch with their stories. And I'm happy to say that this work has continued with others, and later on this year, the California State Prison System will implement a program called Healing Through Creative Practice. And the first module out of 8 is what? Mindfulness. So again, stopping, slowing, or maybe we slow first and then we stop. It's the arriving that's really, really important. And something else that has really touched me deeply is having had the opportunity to be in nature like this, but all over this Western Hemisphere, from Alaska to Peru, from here to the East Coast. And to be in places of antiquity, places of great glaciers, places of a beautiful gorge, a river that runs through to separate 2 states, Washington State and Oregon. And you might have heard our teacher talk about, the wave forgets that it's the water. That there's no separation, right? That it is all one. We just have a tendency to focus on one or the other. But I tell you, when I was high above the gorge and I looked down, I finally saw that the wave in the water is the water and what it meant. I don't know if it was the perspective, point in life, place, but it's like, oh yeah, the wave doesn't end on the shore. It goes back. The wave goes up and it goes down. And from above, I could see it is all one. Stopping, breathing, awestruck. And there it is. And likewise, having the chance to walk in Alabama. You all maybe heard of EJI, Equal Justice Institute, Brian Stevenson, and the utterly brilliant work that's there. And doing walk-in meditation. Around the center, this little square, only maybe as big as where we sit here. But it was fundamental and instrumental in the slave trade. It's one of the places in America that most sold slaves. And that is where the families were separated, bought in by the railroad that they had to build, bought in by the boats, and walked in chains miles and miles. And they'd end up there. And I told the group I was with, I said, I have to walk this place. I have to walk this place. Because for me, walking, like many other parts of my practice, is transformation. I said, I won't be long. And I walked, and I heard mothers scream. I heard babies cry. And I started to do like this, like I was holding a baby myself. Maybe it was myself. And I walked, and I walked. I walked, and I walked. And I thought it was about 20 or 30 minutes. And afterwards, I asked them, I said, how long? They said, Sister Peace, you've been walking for an hour and a half. Transformation, hopefully not only of a space outside of me, which there really isn't, but a space in me and ancestors in me. Because we have the power. We have the power to transform our ancestors. Crossing the Selma Bridge. Same wonderful thing. Looking and stopping and realizing, oh my goodness, I'm looking through the eyes of my ancestors. They saw this thing that many years ago. And I was so glad I found those ancestors' eyes, because now I can use them all the time to stop and look deeply and know and hold and heal and transform. And so grateful that there are so many opportunities for us in our practice to stop. All the things that we've learned thus far and will continue. When we're walking, sitting, eating, sometimes we have to mindfully run through the airport. That's okay. I just want to tell you that's okay. But again, are we doing it with awareness? And can we be okay with we might miss that plane? You know? So I'm going to stop here for a moment and ask for a sound of the bell, and then maybe Brett and I can have a little bit more conversation before lunch.
Well, there's two more small things I want to share. I mean, I think it's dangerous for us to just start having a conversation. Only because there's so much we can say, and time will go really quickly. But two things that are on my heart is, I often teach about this Brazilian educator called Paulo Freire. And amongst many things he did to transform education, he really talked about dialogue as this combination of reflection and action. That if you have action without reflection, it can be violent. But if you have only reflection without action, it's inert, like so much of academia. So what he was teaching and championing is this idea of praxis, that you have this balance of reflection and action. And when you have that, that's real dialogue. That is what dialogue is, reflection and action. And so to this practice, Sister D spoke about it obliquely last night, and you mentioned it. It is about holding both things. It's not just sitting. Part of my attraction to this practice was not just because Thich Nhat Hanh sat all the time. It's because of his action in the world. And because we live in late market capitalism, we don't have a lot of practice reflecting. We're much more practiced in acting. I heard a great healer once in North Carolina talk about, Americans have such great oral hygiene practice. I'm sure you all brought your toothbrushes here with you. Like if you just went away for a weekend, you're gonna take your toothbrush, right? You brush your teeth this morning, you might not floss. At least that's what the dentists say. But I'm sure you brush your teeth. So you have this great toothbrushing, hygiene practice. What's our spiritual practice? Do we have a spiritual practice like our toothbrushing practice? And how do we cultivate that kind of awareness and stopping and reflecting so that we can act skillfully? And so I want to segue into our conversation by going back to griot mode for a moment, in that I didn't talk about the Dharma discussion. And so 20 years ago, I went to Dharma discussion, and there was this person in my Dharma discussion that was like sophisticated, like a metropolitan person, but kind of like country accessible, like a person from the most northern city in the South. And she had kind of like a fade. It was colored blue. And she had these like super tight, kind of asymmetrical glasses, I think. Guess who that was? And so before she was Sister Peace, this was my girl. This was my friend. This was my comrade on the path. And so I just wanted to bring that up before we got going to recognize what a special container of people that we have in this moment. What kind of people choose to take off their time from their lives, their works, their families, to practice? Extraordinary people. So I would just offer or encourage that in addition to the practice and the quiet and the silence, just revel in the companionship, the community of people who share these values of not just external world transformation, but seeing that real transformation happens at the base, happens at us as individuals. What's that make you think?
Well, I think that means,
Or what's that make you think?
Oh, what does it make me think? Wow. It does take me back just a few years before I got to that moment and met the community. Not even in retreat. Well, it was retreat for them and for Congress. It was in 2003. Brother Fabium and some others who maybe were here there came to Washington, D.C. with Hyde to do a retreat for members of Congress, give a talk at the Library of Congress. And through default, I was able to help a woman who was supposed to assist Caroline, who had the beautiful idea to do that, had to be pulled away because the same week the Dalai Lama was coming. It was an anniversary week of 9/11. So they had asked me, they said, well, you used to be in politics. You know, we have this committee, this is the Washington Mindfulness Community. We have this committee called the Committee on Mindful Politics. Nah, no such thing. I'd just been there. I was in politics in D.C. before. No such thing. But then, of course, I learned what it was. And it was a beautiful opportunity to meet the community up close and personal. Can you imagine being with, was it about a dozen monastics and Thai and Sister Chan Conquer? The most frightening thing was actually driving them. But it was all right. It was all right. And every year after that, I had the chance to be in this community. That was 2003. So what happened in 2004? And 2005. Next year, y'all, we're going to be 21. There's got to be a party, too. At the end of 2005, I ended up here for 6 months before I went to Plum Village. And the rest, as they say, is a sketchy history. But when I hear you speak like that, it's true how our lives bring us that fateful decision you made to say no to Coca-Cola. What an extraordinary gift that ends up being to so many others. And seeing that that was a web not worth getting caught in. So grateful for that. So by 2004 and 2005, I could be here with spiky blue hair and meet my brother. So.
Well, I guess part of what it makes me think about 20 years is what happens 20 years from now with all of you? How can I'm a creative person. Like, I've been practicing for 3 decades, making things, imagining things. And yet, I can't even imagine what can come from this room. What this experience, what this exposure, what these camaraderies water for seed and who you become. What choices you do and don't make. I'm a little distracted because I'm thinking of another thing that I think that our community is, at least for me, susceptible to, is that part of building this container of BIPOC people is so that we feel free. That so oftentimes, because of the larger cultural construct that we exist in, we don't always feel free. Or there are conditions that, in spite of our freedom, might want to oppress us, make us suffer. And so it just makes me want to share, even after I had been in the practice, I was in North Carolina doing a project. And even though I had started to water the seeds of compassion in me, just that notion of like slavery was something I just still was like, yeah, man, people who own slaves, I'm not able to be compassionate for them. I wasn't able to. And I started studying this woman, Polly Murray, who was a person who was born in North Carolina, wanted to go to school at North Carolina, but couldn't go there because she was part black. So she went to CUNY. Then she wanted to go to law school at Harvard, couldn't go there because she was a woman. Went to Bolt, did a lot of the Brown versus Board legislation, wrote the first multi-generational, multi-ethnic novel, Proud Shoes, in '52, but is by a woman of color. She was writing about gender, felt like she was a man in a woman's body in the '50s. Was one of the persons that started the National Organization of Women And then in 1977, she went back to school at Yale and got her PhD in holy orders and became the first black Episcopal priest in the same church that her and her mother had to sit in the balcony, at the same pulpit that had her grandmother's owner's name in the pulpit. And so on the one hand, here's this incredible person that like hung out with the dignitaries and did all this great work, and on the other hand, no one knew. And so in the process of doing this project about her, I was reading the book, and she talks about her grandmother being sold into slavery. And the family that owned her was this really kind of esteemed, like the father was a politician, the sons were lawyers, and they were very esteemed. And the one son, even though her grandmother had been assigned to the daughter to take care of her, the one son just said, "This is going to be my partner," illegitimately. And the other son said, "Well, you can say that out loud, but when you're not looking, then I'm going to take her over." And it got so intense that eventually they fought and almost killed each other. And it was a scandal and scandalized the father and scandalized the family, not to mention, obviously, the violence that the grandmother experienced through this process. But it was in that process that I came to understand that those people are suffering. That whatever sickness or unskillfulness or suffering or oppression we project is really a reflection of our own suffering. And it's come through all of our teachers, and I think of the experiences of Larry and so many people who have gone through traumatic oppression from Klansmen and supremacists and these things. But like the flower, if I look really deeply, those people are sick. And for me to inverse that oppression does not help them become whole. And for me to absorb that oppression, it's not mine. That's not my stuff. But that doesn't mean I can't recognize the suffering in them and let them carry that and transform it. And so I just wanted to share that because I know so oftentimes in these communities, mostly I want to celebrate the joy in the extraordinary moment, and I don't want to ignore the fact that we come from a certain type of discrimination. And part of interbeing is getting to an understanding that we're all interconnected and that I can't perpetuate that discrimination if I want to transform and find wholeness in myself, to relieve the suffering in myself. And in that way, I relieve the suffering in the world. So that just was heavy on my heart. I felt to share that.
Thank you, Brett. And I think that that's the last great story we have time for today, though we have the rest of the week to be together and share, and encourage you to share your stories, your deepest stories that you feel comfortable in our sharing groups, because this is a unique opportunity to share with those that mirror similar distress. Because it's true, we have to address it all. And so with that, we just want to thank you for your attention. Thank you for your smiles. Thank you for your eye hugging. Thank you for your great insights. And so we'll ask for a final sound of the bell, then our announcers will come. So before we stand, let's relax our knees and legs a little bit, get the blood flowing. And then at the next sound of the bell, we'll stand and bow to each other, and then we'll turn and bow to the altar.
So dear friends, after you stand up, you bow to the altar, and then please sit back down again for some announcements. Thank you.